Welcome to the Maine Real Estate Roundtable podcast. I'm Bobbie Grenier, your trusted guide to navigating the world of real estate in Maine. Get ready to debunk mortgage myths, unravel real estate mysteries, and learn tips to avoid costly mistakes. Whether you're an industry pro, an overwhelmed buyer, confused seller, or simply curious about life in Maine, this is the podcast for you. Welcome to the Maine Real Estate Roundtable podcast. I'm your host, Bobbie, and this is a podcast where we talk about all things Maine real estate. You hit play, and I want to thank you whether you are a new listener to the podcast or you are my OG listener. You are the marshmallow to my hot chocolate and the reason that I hit record. Today, we're taking it beyond business and talking about a side of real estate that often flies under the radar. That is the emotional roller coaster that buyers and sellers can sometimes experience during a real estate transaction. We spend so much time focusing on contracts, financing, inspections, and title work, the whole business end of real estate. But what about the stress, the anxiety, and the wide range of emotions that buyers and sellers face, often without even realizing it's coming for them? How can something as exciting as buying or selling a home, a huge milestone in life, bring so much stress? To help us unpack this, I'm thrilled to welcome back Jen Cammack, a real estate agent with EXP Realty, the Happy Place team, and a second-time guest on the podcast. Jen brings a unique perspective with her background in counseling and her passion for helping real estate professionals better understand and support their clients through the emotional journey of a real estate transaction. Jen talks about how she feels there's a lack of training and tools for agents in this area, and she's here to share strategies and insights that can make a big difference, not only for agents, but also for buyers and sellers. This is an incredible resource for anyone preparing to buy or sell a home, helping you anticipate some of the challenges and emotions you might face. So whether you're a real estate professional looking to improve your skills, or a buyer or a seller wanting to understand the emotional side of the process, this is the episode for you. So comfy spot, check. Coffee, check. Let's jump in. Welcome back, Jen.
Hey, thank you.
So for anybody listening, this is Jen's second visit to the podcast. And if you want to learn more about Jen, go back and listen to episode 12, where she was talking about her jump to being a dual state licensed agent. We were just catching up on that, and everything's going great for you. So I'm so happy for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. It's been great.
We're going to switch gears today, and it's something that we were just talking, it's sort of serendipitous that we both happen to be thinking that this is a topic that needs more discussion and needs more attention. So that is the psychology and the emotions that are involved in a real estate transaction. And I want to jump right off with asking you how you feel your background in psychology has helped you manage the many, many, many different emotions that your buyer and seller clients experience in a real estate transaction.
Oh gosh, I think it's probably what I use the most in helping my clients navigate. And with the experience in real estate and combining that with my background, I think I've become much more skilled at preventing some of the emotional stresses for my clients, which has been super helpful.
I'd like to talk about buyers first.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that buyers worked on, they've waited for. Most of them, this represents a dream, something that they've had a goal for their future. So at what point in the process do you feel like buyers start kind of cracking and feeling the pressure and emotion and the weight of buying a home in that real estate transaction?
Well, I think in the process of proceeding with an offer and then heading into inspections, that tends to be, in my experience, the most stressful part for buyers. And I think the unknown, of what could come out of this, the investment, if people do a full battery of inspections, that could be up to $1,200. That's a buyer cost. So investing that and knowing that this may not work out and I may lose that money, that's a lot of money. And so, I think that is probably their most stressful part. once that sort of passes and we get through that, things tend to calm down a little bit. But I find that communication and constant communication and education is key.
I find, and you can tell me if you agree or not, that there is definitely more emotions involved in selling property. It's bittersweet. They're letting
Hmm.
go of their home in many cases, homes that they've lived in for many years. They have personal history. They've made memories. They've had Christmas, all of the things, all of the emotions. So, when do you usually see that sellers really start to feel the pressure with selling the property and those emotions start to hit?
I think right after they go under contract, usually, and sometimes the getting ready to list, it really depends on the situation. But I think one of the things I remember, whether I'm working with buyers or sellers, is that if someone is going to proceed with a real estate transaction, it's a transition in their life. And sometimes that transition is happy, sometimes it's sad, but it's always going to have emotions involved. I mean, we help people buy their first home, we help them sell their deceased parents' homes. I mean, there's just so many scenarios that I think depending on their situation, that stress can kind of come and go through the whole process. But it tends to be, I think when you're selling a home and people are coming into your home and seeing it and providing feedback and scrutinizing things, that can become emotional and offensive. And, just depends. But it can be stressful throughout, really.
So, do you find that the emotions of both buyers and sellers feel it's bound to influence their decision making? And it
Yes.
probably, in that, can lead to a lot of unexpected stress or maybe even subconsciously hindering the deal in doing
Mm-hmm.
that. Do you have any
Mm-hmm.
experience with that?
Yes, absolutely. I have experienced buyers that start to really backpedal and feel a lot of remorse about moving forward and get really scared. And I've experienced sellers do the same, actually, which I think for most of us that work in real estate full time, we know that a transaction isn't done until we all leave the closing table. Things can really happen right up until the last minute. I've had transactions where, something's about to close in 3 days and somebody dies. I mean, it's just life. And so I think the role of us through the process for our clients is really underestimated. And what we can do to sort of be a stabilizing, grounding presence for them through the process is super, super important. I think if and we all work with various agents in the industry, and those agents that tend to sort of react and escalate can really influence a transaction in one way. And those of us that know how to prevent and communicate and just keep reminding people that this isn't brain surgery. Like these problems can all really be fixed. And sometimes it means that we have to extend or we have to make some changes along the way. But at the end of the day, everybody has a common goal in mind. And if we have a great team working together, we can really take care of our people until the end, which is super important.
You mentioned buyer's remorse. Can
Hmm.
you explain what buyer's remorse is and maybe what that might look like during the transaction?
Sure. So I think that, back to that inspection process, when a buyer sort of sees a house, and we've had markets that are pretty wild and crazy. So a buyer literally has, 30 minutes to walk through a house and decide if they want to buy it, or it could be gone tomorrow. And so proceeding with an offer, getting into the inspection process, and now spending, 3 hours in the house and going through everything with the inspector and seeing that there may be imperfections, there may be things to deal with. Now we have to negotiate with a seller, and they sort of start to feel really scared about that. And maybe still looking at what's on the market. Maybe they see something else, feel like the grass is greener in another house, and maybe we should jump ship. Um, and sometimes they do, and that's sort of why we have that security, of the contingency through an inspection period, because that's really when buyers can catch their breath and absorb and get to know the home, get to know they may be talking with their lender more about their finances, about what this could look like, and in many different scenarios, depending on which loan type they're in, what their down payment is. So all that's going on at the same time, and it's really stressful. That beginning 2 weeks, I think, really sort of stops them often in their tracks, especially if it's their first time buying a home and they haven't experienced it before. It can be super overwhelming. And so they may backpedal because of the home or because of finances or because their parents have come and triggered a lot of fear about what they're doing. That's another big thing that I've seen happen a lot. And sometimes it's a matter of just patiently navigating and supporting them through the process and kind of letting some of that stress and anxiety work itself out. And if they're hard in their decision to back out, then we have to support them, and that's the decision they have to make. But more often than not, I think it's a matter of just knowing the process and navigating with them, and just kind of letting those kinks get worked out.
So the flip side of that is the seller that may be caught up in making the decision to sell, getting their home ready to sell, staging, pricing, all the things. And then when they get that great offer and they accept that great offer, what does that oh shit moment look like? Which I'm sure most sellers have when all of that is done and they have to really sit with the fact that they've got to sell their home and they've got this big transition coming.
Yes, absolutely. The selling side, I find, is a little bit more paced. They definitely have that same stress, but when I work with a seller, I'm usually working with them, a few weeks ahead of time, getting the home ready. And with sellers, I feel like I have a lot more influence in helping prevent the stress than I do with buyers in the process. So, one of the things I recommend to all my sellers is to do pre list inspections with a reputable, respected inspector in the area that most other real estate agents will recognize and acknowledge as a worthy inspection. That in and of itself, and I do this as a seller myself. I've bought and sold many homes over the past few years, and I think that that is hugely important in preventing some of those stressors, because then the seller is sort of a little bit more in the driver's seat and they don't feel as vulnerable to sort of being beat up, for lack of a better, during the inspection process by buyers that they don't know. Some buyers may buy a home and they know it's not a brand new home and they know they have a honey-do list that they should expect. Other buyers expect it to be perfect and really scrutinize and come up with, quite a laundry list of things that sellers can feel are, irrational, unnecessary. There's just so much subjective perceptions about homes and buying and selling that, I think if we can prevent things from escalating or feeling as emotional as, they don't need to be, that really helps. And so if a seller does pre-list inspections, we work really hard. As you know, I do a lot with staging and presentation, which I think is equally important to really appeal to buyers and present the home and showcase it in its absolute best. That coupled with inspections and really doing your homework and getting to educate a buyer about every single thing about that home that you can, whether it be the list of updates and upgrades that you've done, the maintenance work that's been done. When that inspection comes back, the inspector almost always will have some points, and that gives the seller the ability to say, oh gosh, yeah, I guess we need to update some electrical work here. We didn't even think about that. We've been in the house 20 years. Or, do you really think that I need to repair the cracked piece of tile in the bathroom? And so when we work together through that process and I really help them prioritize and go about things in an economical way too. I mean, renovating a whole kitchen before you sell is almost never going to bring you that investment back. So working around that and really figuring out ways to navigate, maybe you offer a buyer a concession up front to do the amount of updates to apply to the updates they may want, or just problem solving through the things that we in the industry know buyers are likely to want or ask for. And usually that's a focus on major system items, addressing things that may be a safety issue. And all homes, even new homes, are going to have their things. So working in that process before listing can eliminate so many stressors, because we inevitably know that when they start packing the house up and get ready to move to their next place, that has a whole ball of stress all by itself. So if we can get rid of the stress about the house itself, that's really helpful. And then when, when the inspections are over and the appraisal comes, that's another, especially during the years where the market was crazy and people were, getting $50,000 over asking, those appraisals often weren't coming in. So that was another navigation of stress to get a lot of sellers through. And then as closing approaches, and the packing happens, it's exhausting. It's really stressful. So usually, there's sort of some ebbs and flows through the process, but then by closing day, it's usually a celebration and a happy day that they've kind of made it to where they want to be.
Well, we talked about buyer's remorse, but seller's remorse is a thing too. And I don't know about
Hmm.
you, but I've seen on the closing company side of it, like I've thought, and I probably even said out loud, do they even want to sell their house? Because in thinking about it now as we're talking, it's probably just a lot of things manifesting from, they may not even realize they're doing it. So it could be manifesting from that remorse, all of those emotions that they're feeling that they might not be as responsive as they need to be, or do the things that we might need their help with to clear a title issue or do something, for the condition of the property on your end. Do you find that as well?
Yes. I sort of look at this probably sounds morbid, but if you think about the grief process, that's kind of how I look at the process of selling your home. Because I mean, I can just give an example. Recently, I've been helping a family that's ready to downsize, and their kids are getting through college and graduating. They have elderly parents that are in another location they want to move closer to be able to help. And, they've been in this home for over 20 years and raised their family there. They have roots in this community. And, um, we work through the process. They receive an offer, it's a lower offer. And they sort of say, we're not doing that. We don't have to sell this house. Like, there's no urgency here. But then the next week, it's like, why aren't we having showings? We're supposed to sell the house. Like, why isn't this happening? I'm getting worried. So it's almost like this roller coaster, right? And then it's kind of that process where when I ask myself, do they really want to sell? We've been through all this. We've got an offer. They don't even want to counter. Maybe they're wondering if they really do want to sell. But you just keep moving forward. And sometimes I think that's part of the grieving. You know what I mean? Of letting go of my house and my memories and taking my memories with me. And they're also going through all the things. Their kids' drawings from sixth grade, and they're having parties and they're telling their neighbors that they're moving and they're having going away parties. It's like it's a lot. It's a lot. So I sort of look at it as we went through all of this work of doing an inspection, staging your home, getting it on the market. You've prepared for showings. You clean your house every day. Like they want to sell, but sometimes it's just like you've got to push pause and let those emotions work through and move forward. And then before you know it, a week later, we've got a better offer. They're excited, they're under contract, and the whole process feels different than it did a week ago, which I think it always brings me back to the importance of us as their counsel. Advice and counsel is the reason that you have an agent, number one, to me. And if I were to be reactionary or impulsive with them or upset with them or angry with them because what you said you want to do, you're not doing. I mean, I see this happen in our industry, and that can be really damaging. I mean, not just to the real estate transaction. The big picture is it's about the relationship. It's we need to take care of these people through this process. And emotions mean that sometimes they don't seem rational or like they're consistent. It can be all over the place, but that's part of the process that we need to understand and really just keep ourselves grounded and be there for them and let them have their emotions and be supportive. It's super important. And if we can do that, the process usually goes just fine and gets to where it needs to be.
We both can agree that it's overwhelming, but this is commonplace for us. This is
Mm-hmm.
commonplace for real estate agents, closing companies, real estate professionals, and in that we are just going about our business and maybe not always thinking about everything that the clients are going through. And I've intentionally been trying to do a much better job when I speak with people when they call Trilogy to talk about very basic questions about the process. And it's a great reminder. And my son bought a house this fall, and that was also a great reminder to me. And he's 24. So he had no idea, no clue what was going on, and that was so impactful for me to see that
Hmm.
again, and a reminder being a 20-year veteran doing this. So we do this every day, commonplace. Do you think real estate agents and real estate professionals are doing a great job in preparing their buyers and sellers for how overwhelming the whole process may be?
Ooh, that's a loaded question because I have to say no. I really do. I think, and part of that isn't necessarily, falling on the agent as it does fall on the agent, but I think the nature of the beast and the industry, which we saw during COVID, I mean, we had such a period of time where you couldn't even sit down and meet with your buyers before you had to get them into a house and there were multiple offers on everything. The sense of urgency was so huge, and we were not in person, so we were doing a lot virtually, which actually was okay. But I think when the market throttles us and you're moving so fast, taking that time to educate becomes secondary, and it just can't. We really have to get back to the good old days when, and we are now because of the changes, which I think is really good. We can't just go show properties to buyers unless they have agreements with us and they've been pre-approved. And that's what should have been happening all along. But I think a lot of people sort of, circumvented some of those things. And sitting down with your buyer, and if you can, even better, the buyer and the lender at the same time, and even title, if we can pull title in early. When I have sellers, let's say, we were talking earlier about people that have, sold pieces of their property off 18 times, and the deeds are all screwed up and nobody can find them, and half of them are registered and half of them aren't. That can cause a lot of delays at the end, and people get angry and they get emotional about that. But if we come back in the beginning and really educate them, buyers and sellers, this is the process. I always say, I don't want to scare you, but I do want to prepare you for some of the bumps in the road. And there's inevitably going to be bumps in the road, that can happen with sellers on the other end that you can't control. It can happen in the lending process. Sometimes, there's certain underwriters that are stricter than others. They may have conditions that we didn't plan for that we need to work with the sellers to work through. Sometimes there are title issues and searches. Maybe we do those title searches in the beginning rather than at the end if we know that this is going to be a complicated property. I mean, selling a 250-acre parcel that has gone through a family 14 times is very different than an in-town quarter-acre lot that's never changed. So sometimes I like to work with partners on the team at different phases in the process to get a jump start on things that I know are going to become a problem. So again, prevention and education. I mean, we just can't do enough of it, in my opinion.
Well, that kind of leads me to something else I wanted to talk about. Do you think it should be some type of requirement for training for real estate professionals, but specifically real estate agents, to be able to manage that emotional piece for their clients and
Hmm.
give them the skills? Because real estate agents are just like every other profession and population. You have people that are, more emotional, people that are a little more mature or more seasoned, and sometimes it isn't even, new agents might be very, very calm and stabilizing to their clients. Do you think there should be required training for that?
Absolutely. I definitely do. I work with so many different agents. I coach new agents, and I take for granted, I must admit, I take it for granted that my background has brought me and prepared me for things in real estate that I didn't necessarily anticipate until I got experienced and worked through many transactions and bought and sold myself. Experiencing that stress after you've been in one home that you've raised your kids in, is a whole other ball game, that really humbled me and created even more empathy than I thought I already had. In my background, I used to work with really challenged children with autism and behavior disorders. And so, and I became certified in a lot of de-escalating strategies, for kids that were really struggling and having a hard time. I worked with, adolescent boys that, you have to be clever. They are fast and furious. And so, I knew a lot of things about just helping people navigate when they're not feeling their best. And so I can look around me and see agents struggle and sometimes take things really personally when their clients are frustrated and upset and lash out. One of my early mentors, Carolyn Fish, told me, this ain't for sissies. And she was right. She's been in the business a long time, and back when, it was even harder, especially for women in the business. And I learned really early that you have to have thick skin in this game, and really keep yourself in check and do things to take care of yourself, to be present and stabilizing and grounding for others, for sure.
Switching gears a little bit, how much do you find the financial uncertainty, be it for buyers or sellers, that attributes to that stress? In this market, I look at some of the home prices and wonder, how are these people, these kids, they look like kids to us now, don't they,
Yes, they do.
dealing with this and taking on this huge financial stress? Or the flip side of that, you talked about the appraisal coming in. Maybe a seller agreed on a sales price and the appraisal came in so much higher. So they're feeling like, oh, rats, I could have gotten so much more money. Do you find that really attributes a lot?
I think it does. The financial piece that's a burden through the entire process because they know it's not going away after the sale. It's not like the inspection when it's over and we've worked through the issues, now we're done. The financial piece is going to be there forever. And, I think one of the things we see, I mean, it's very likely that people are going to move through real estate transactions much faster than they used to. When I help a first-time home buyer buy a house, I can almost guarantee I'm going to get a call within 3 years that they're ready to sell and upgrade. So I think that the perception is that this is more temporary than it used to be. People aren't necessarily going into their forever homes out of the gate. Um, but the financial stress is definitely there, and it always brings me back to education and prevention. And really problem solving that beforehand, working with our buyers before they get into a house. The minute they step into that pretty house, the emotions go right up, and the dreams start becoming reality. But if we can talk about beforehand, if they're in a certain price point and we know putting them in a more populated area in town near everything they want to be near is going to be more expensive than getting 15 minutes outside of town into maybe a town with less taxes and that's a little more reasonable in the price point, or you get a little more bang for your buck. Like kind of going through all those conversations ahead and really getting a gauge on what are your top priorities? What are your non-negotiables? If you need a garage and the house doesn't have one and you could build one in a couple of years, would that be okay? Or is that a non-negotiable? And so helping to educate them to say, you know what? If you have to be in this price point, we're likely to have to bend a little bit on something. You may not get everything. So what are you willing to bend on? And really asking those questions and getting those wheels turning before they walk into a house, super helpful at eliminating some of those financial stressors. So, and same with sellers, I educate them at our very first appointment on the appraisal and talk about what we've seen in the market over the past few years. That when I suggest a list price for your house, it's because I'm looking at it through the eyes of the appraiser, and what they are going to do to value your home. And if you really want to test the market and go above that within reason, we can do that, and by the time your appraisal rolls around, there may be additional comps to support a little bit higher price. But if the appraisal doesn't come in, we have to be prepared for that. Preventing some of those things with education is just huge.
Yeah, it's a challenge to marry the business end of it, the financial piece, with all of the emotions that that the client may be going through. And it always amazes me when even when I sit down at closing and they start questioning their closing costs, which is fine. I'll explain anything, but that they didn't expect them to be there. And I'm thinking, oh, sir, I know, I hope that your real estate agent did an estimate for you, that they figured in your closing costs, they figured in your payoff, as close as they could get, and did
Hmm.
that for you. So it's kind of interesting to see that at the closing table, that I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but some almost like they feign that they weren't aware. So we've talked a lot about once you're under contract and all of that, but there is a whole range of emotions that go in making offers, counter offers, back and
Hmm.
forth. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes. That was really prevalent during the COVID years when, we were having multiple offers on almost every property, and different people navigate that differently. And I think that the way you choose to advise your sellers can really impact the level of stress that you have. For example, if I were working with a buyer and I were showing a house and the agent said there's 10 showings, but we don't have any offers yet. So some agents would submit that offer with a, you know, 4-hour deadline and try to scoop it up before anybody else could see it. And then the sellers, of course, would inevitably say, well, no, we think we're getting other offers. And then your buyer is all stressed out. And, there was a lot of that. So when I facilitated working with sellers during those times, and again, like, let's keep everybody calm and reasonable, right? And look at the team. This is a transaction with a team. So even if I'm a seller, my best buyer is a part of my team. Their lender is a part of my team. The title company is a part of my team. The inspector, the appraiser, this is a team effort. So if I'm representing a seller, I say to my seller, you know, your property is likely to have a lot of activity, a lot of offers. I would suggest that we keep it on the market for a week and let your best buyers walk through, and anybody that wants a chance to make an offer on your property to do that. And then we evaluate all of those offers to determine which buyer is your match, is your best match. And and then once that process happens, when you eliminate the crisis of the time, because then you have buyer agents calling that are anxious. I mean, God forbid they are away for a weekend because they can't get their people into the house. Like, and I've experienced all that. This is a 24/7 job. And, real estate agents have death in the family. They need to take a break sometimes. Like, and I think people should be able to do that and not have this under the gun pressure because somebody needs to sell or buy a house. I always go back to this isn't emergency surgery. There's ways we can do this that can be a little more realistic. So I usually advise people to let them, take the time, then we'll evaluate. And then I always summarize all of the offers. I usually, because, you're reading 10 6-page purchase and sale agreements, weeding through all of the pre-approvals and all those things. And so I usually take all of the details and summarize them and say, let's set up a time to talk, sit down, and we're going to talk about each one. And, it's usually a pretty obvious choice, which one is going to be best for them. And so that process I have found really helped through those stressful, hot properties. And it helped on both the buy side and the sell side. I wanted buyers to know, if you're really interested, I want you to see this house and have a chance at it. So, and that's another thing too. I think for agents that work with both buyers and sellers, I feel it's really important because I think you need empathy for that whole team and to know, when I'm helping sell a home that's going to be a hot one and a multiple offer one, I also know how that buyer feels that's lost out on 3 or 4 homes because I'm helping them too. And so having some compassion for that is super important, and to help your sellers have compassion for that.
How do you keep sellers in check with, we use the term pride in homeownership a lot in this
Hmm.
industry. So the seller that thinks because he personally refinished and sanded the hardwood floors and he has that pride that he did that and they came out beautiful, as opposed to hiring a company. The seller that thinks that increases the value. How do you manage that? How do you keep that in check with also honoring the fact that that's how they feel?
Hmm. Well, I think certainly acknowledging and validating their efforts and their good work and how important that's been for them in their house is really important. But I also think that you have to use data and we have to let the market speak to us. And I think sometimes going to data and looking at the market helps bring some of that emotion out. And I go through this, I mean, staging is a good example. When I have a home to list and it's all decked out in antiques that someone has collected over the years that are meaningful and sentimental to them. And, it's a really hard thing to tell them that this appeals to you, but really not anyone else, because, you know, that's the secret of staging. It's not taste specific. It's about neutralizing. And what I tell them is if I bring 20 buyers through your home, I want all 20 of them to think it's beautiful, not just one. So using data in the market, I think really helps because the hardwood floor example is a good one because I could show the client, here's 10 other homes that have beautiful hardwood floors. And that buyer is going to look at all those homes the same, whether you did the floors or a professional did the floors. The hardwood floors only have so much value in the market. And that's where we have to go with that. I think to take them out of the equation and us out of the equation and say, let the market talk to us about what this is worth. And does this add value or doesn't it?
For the buyers, we were talking about COVID and the crazy market and buyers. I know I did many closings where buyers were like, "Oh my word, we put in, you know, 10 offers on 10 different homes and we finally got one." Do you find, and this probably plays back into the buyer's remorse thing, do you find that buyers get caught up in the competition of getting that home that they might either go under contract for a home that might not be the right home for them or paying more than they're comfortable with?
Yes, I think that's definitely a risk. And I think I'm repeating myself again, but why I go back to before you start the home process and getting into a home, that education and that problem solving and using your experience as an agent to really help that buyer prioritize, and pull the lender in. I can't emphasize enough, like, oh my gosh, the creativity in lending and a couple of the lenders I work with that are just such great problem solvers. One in particular that has a background in underwriting. And I feel like looking at all of the options and her creativity to work with buyers to say, when a buyer says, I absolutely cannot pay more than $1,500 a month in a house payment. I just can't. That's gonna dampen, a lot of what we can do. So if that means that they're searching for homes in a price point and maxing out at that, and then there's competition, so they're not going to be able to compete in that price point. We have to help them understand that in the beginning, not after they have gotten inside the home and fallen in love with it, and now there's no chance of getting it. Talk about emotions. I mean, that is devastating. Preventing is, and educating ahead of time can save those buyers so much heartache.
So you mentioned that usually by closing day, everything's settled down, everything's calm. I don't always see that. I'm not going to lie. And I've thought about
Yeah.
it. I thought about it quite a bit. And I think that it's maybe almost like a PTSD type of
Yes.
situation. So they've held their shit together through
Yep.
the whole transaction. They've gone from, one thing to the next thing to the next thing. So they've just got their eye on the ball and they get to the end. And a lot of times, I mean, for the most part, it's really, like you said, joyous and it's a good thing. It's a good day. Everybody's happy. But some days that's when the ugly kind of comes out.
Yes.
Maybe so many things happen, challenges through the transaction that were worked through, but then that last little whatever last minute thing, the straw breaks the camel's back and they are not happy at closing. Do you have any way of sort of anticipating that and dealing with it maybe before we're all sitting down at the table?
There's some situations where have to roll through it, and we can't necessarily do anything about it or prevent it from happening. I have had those. I've had closings where the buyer and seller can't even sit at the same table to sign. One has to sign ahead of time, the other one signs later. And I think that the nature of the beast is that these are human beings, and some are completely irrational and unrealistic, and no matter what you do or how many hoops you jump through, they're just not going to be happy, and they've decided that. And so, for those situations, we just do the best that we can, continue to maintain our professionalism and advise. And there's some that like to use their team as their punching bags. Been there, absolutely been there. In the beginning of real estate, that was a little tough for me at first. I think going back to this business isn't for sissies. My good friend Carolyn said, I learned right out of the gate that this industry is really competitive. It can be cutthroat, it can be challenging, and the perception of what we do from the public isn't necessarily the reality. And so utilizing us as their, outlets for stress is something that a lot of people feel just fine about. And I think sometimes we have to also create our boundaries and maintain our self-preservation, take care of ourselves, and just do the best we can to navigate those difficult situations. 9 times out of 10, I think a skilled agent can help prevent a lot of them. And I found that the majority of the time, a lot of it is having that compassion right to the end. I had a recent transaction that, a family sold their forever home that they thought they built absolutely beautiful, about 6 years ago, and just decided to make a huge change and move out of state. And, the right up until the closing day, they were packing the U-Haul. An hour before closing, I stopped at their house to pick up the lockbox and see how they were doing. And um, he was packing the U-Haul. She had gone to run an errand and got back and got out of the truck and saw me and just broke down in tears. And I said, I thought this might be where you were today. And so, that's the emotion people are feeling right up until the end. And fortunately, she was also a friend of mine. I wrapped my arms around her and gave her a big hug, and we got to closing, and they started to connect with their buyers more and talk about things about the house and exchange their numbers and call us if you need anything. And we walked out of closing, and I said, you're going to be about 2 hours down the road in the U-Haul when you finally can take a breath.
That's a great way to handle it. We rely so heavily, in the closing world, we rely so heavily on real estate agents, but so many times it's interesting because you may call me and say, Bobbie, are you doing my 10 o'clock closing? Yep, I'm doing it. Okay. And the buyers have been upset with the sellers, and this has happened and that's happened. And I just want to, things are tense. Things are really, sensitive right now, so be careful. And I'm like, okay, thanks for the heads up. But by the time I get into the closing, everybody's great. So I learned years ago, don't ever go into a closing like, oh man, everybody's going to be upset. I walk into every single one with a smile on my face, and this is the best thing ever. And I soon find out whether they think it's the best thing ever or not. But 9 times out of 10, it's like you said, just before the closing, they're kind of releasing and losing it. And then when they get to closing, everything's calmed down. So I guess that's good news for me.
It is. And the role of the agent is completely underestimated. I think I've said that and I would say it again. You know, I've had agents I work with that I'm representing one side or the other, and I call and say, my client is a little concerned about this. Would you please reach out to your client and see if this is a possibility? And they immediately snap and answer for their client and have an emotional reaction. And I know we're in for a tough transaction, and that I have to be extra diligent in being a grounding rod for my clients, because on the other side, we've got escalation, escalation, escalation. And then on the flip side, if you have a great team and everybody's working toward the same goal, you can have some of the toughest issues come up during the transaction that just go smoothly because of the people involved and how we navigate. So it's, you know, I haven't thought about this until you asked that question. Do you think agents need a training? And I think that would be amazing to help people understand the importance of how they are communicating and reacting with their clients. because that's walking into that closing with everybody happy sure is the best end to the process.
Absolutely. It's the best, the absolute best part of my job for sure. I want you to give our takeaways in two separate ways here. So, first, I want you to talk to your real estate agent colleagues and give them some actionable, realistic advice how they can sort of increase their emotional intelligence in serving
Mhm.
their clients better, and preparing their clients, which you've talked so much about, maybe some resources.
Well, I think the ahead of time, the work ahead of time to prevent and educate is huge. And like you mentioned, we do this every day. We take for granted the process. We need to approach every single client like it's the very first time anybody has done this. And because even when we do educate, if emotions are high, they're not they're not receiving the information and processing it. So the best time to do that is before it gets emotional. So before the house gets listed, before the buyers step into a home, let's talk about the process. Let's talk about, the potential things that we see as bumps in the road and how we navigate those bumps together. And really creating that foundation in the very beginning that you are going to have their back through the entire time and that you are there to help them and support them and communicate with them through the whole process, and that almost every problem that comes up can be solved. We've just got to navigate it together. And then I think communication, which we haven't really talked about much during the podcast, but I have to give that as a plug. I'm working with a client right now who right up front says, I'm super anxious. This is super stressful. And probably, I mean, messages, I don't know how much, because you know what? She has to verbally process things, which she does in texts or calls or whatever. And I've just understood that she just needs to get this out. I don't necessarily have to have an answer. I just have to be here and acknowledge and respond. So I'm texting and communicating with her maybe more than I would other people, but that's what she needs. So communicating is huge. When I hear complaints from other people that come to me because they've been unhappy with their agent, it is almost always because of lack of responsiveness and communication. Learning those skills and how to not take things personally, but getting to know the learning style and the needs of your client. Some people need more than others, and that's okay. So being there for them in the way that is supportive for them is really important to sort of dig into. And self-care, I think that we underestimate the need we have to take care of ourselves, which I think is also why it's so important to collaborate with other people, whether it be a team member or just people in your own workplace that, I really want to take a weekend off and I want to disconnect. Would you mind doing some showings for me?
Now let's talk to buyers and sellers,
Hmm.
whether they're considering it, whether they're just starting out, whether they're in the thick of it. Um, can you talk to them and maybe just give them a little bit of insight or maybe some strategies to help be less anxious?
If I were a buyer or a seller, and some will interview several agents, I think what I would say is have those conversations, ask some tough questions. What is your communication preference? If I reach out to you, how long should I expect to wait for you to get back to me? How do you go about this? And if we have 3 showings scheduled and there's buyer agents screaming and hollering and people showing up at my house, like, what do I do about that? There's so many different scenarios, but who you hire to represent you is really critical, and how they're going to navigate not only the emotions, but all of the things and all of the people and all of the different moving parts of the transaction. And I think interviewing agents and sitting down and really getting a sense of whether or not this is feeling like a good fit. I mean, it's like doing anything else. It's like, do you connect with this person? Do you feel like they're going to be there for you or not? Most of us know within 5 minutes whether or not we hit it off, So I think that hiring a real estate agent should be no different. I mean, of course, everybody Googles, they want to see who's recommended, they want to see the reviews, but really sitting down with that person and maybe more than once, I think people interview agents and they want to know, what's the commission? What are you going to list my house for? That's always the topics. But digging a little bit deeper into that and getting to know that person and how you feel like they're going to be by your side or not for the next several weeks or months is super important. And when I meet with people, and they ask, why should I hire you as opposed to somebody else? Because, the commission is one thing. And I tell them, you're going to meet with a bunch of different agents. Some are going to or tell, try to buy your listing and tell you your house is worth $50,000 more than it is. Some are going to undercut commissions to try to get the sale. You know, Money's one part, and I know money is probably one of the most important parts, but really look at the other parts too. And I had to decide in the beginning of whether or not I was going to pursue this job full time and really make it successful, or I wasn't. And I just decided, I adopted one rule, that if I'm working with you, you are my family. I treat you as I would my own parents, my brother, my sister, myself, and that's how I represent you. And that's the way I roll. And so if that isn't good enough to hire me, then they may not be a match for me. They may want somebody more, you know, black and white, and that doesn't communicate as much as I do, or there different people have different needs, and everybody isn't going to be your cup of tea because the neighbor recommended them. And I think you've really got to invest that time to spend some time with that person, talk to them about who they are as a person. What's your experience? What have you done? Who's your family? Where do you live? What do you like to do? All those things. It's important. I used to say, well, before we had our, stricter rules about how we did business, because the expectation and the norm in our industry would be a buyer would call and want to get into a property, and you go show it to them, and then you start talking. And I used to say, the first date's for free. You don't have to sign anything with me. We're going to check each other out, see if this is a fit or it isn't. And now we can't do that. We need a buyer agreement signed before we even walk through a door. And so I find myself doing a lot of Zoom meetings ahead of time and sitting down and trying to really meet with people in person to get to know them and let them get to know me and see me personally as well as professionally.
That's an interesting point, that with the recent changes, it changes the climate, it changes how things need to be approached, and everybody, for real estate agents, buyers, sellers, everybody's trying to make that fit, navigate that, figure that out. So that's really an interesting point.
In my opinion, made us better. I think the changes, are positive if we embrace them and really look at why they're there and what we can do about it, and shift the industry into the professionalism it needs to be.
I love that. And I think that is an absolutely wonderful note for us to end this episode on. I appreciate you so much, Jen, and I can see you being a regular on this podcast. I absolutely love talking with you.
Oh, I love it too. I always love my time with you. You're fantastic and doing a great job with it. I love it. Thank you so much, Bobbie.
This has been the Maine Real Estate Roundtable podcast with Bobbie Grenier. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion and will share this episode with a friend. And don't forget to leave a review and follow the podcast so you don't miss new episodes. The content of this podcast is for informational purposes and not intended as legal advice or representation by myself or any of the guests on the podcast. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep it real.